Affordability, they had Black and Veatch do a national cost compliance study, looked at their assessment of the rates at different system sizes. And for a system of 250 people, you're going to see water rate increases annually of $500 or $1,000 a year. And that can have a real impact on a real community.
Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast, where we bring you interviews with industry leaders, climate champions, sustainability practitioners, EHS and hazmat professionals making an impact in their businesses today. Each leader solving complex challenges and delivering solutions within their areas of expertise. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and thanks for joining us today. Before we jump in, make sure to follow us on your devices and visit my website at www.seankgrady.com and sign up for our newsletter and email announcements. Now let's get started. Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is Alan Roberson. He is the Executive Director of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, or better known as ASDWA. The ASDWA members, they are the state and territorial drinking water agencies, are co-regulators under the Safe Drinking Water Act with the Environmental Protection Agency. He has over 34 years of experience in the development of drinking water policy and federal and state drinking water regulations. Prior to him starting at ASDWA in 2017, he worked for the American Water Works Association in Washington, D.C. And he was there for like 25 years. So, it's safe to say Alan has been a veteran in water and drinking water agency support and I guess regulatory policy development for many, many years. He currently is a board member of Fairfax Water board director. He's been there since 2009. So goodness, that's been a long run there. He's the treasurer and chairman of the Water Quality and Supply Committee. And he also is an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and teaching drinking water policy classes there. So, Alan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me, Sean. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, this has been good because I was your name popped up to me when I was reading the EPA rule, and you were quoted in there, and I was like, let's connect with Alan and see if there's an opportunity to get some insights from the regulatory administrators that are kind of basically left with implementing these rules, and get his take on what is being proposed, and also the challenges that the agencies currently face with implementing the existing current rule for PFAS that's out there. So let's dive into that. But before we do, could you give us a little more background on, the association that you represent? What's the mission? How do you help these state agencies? And what are you involved with?
Yeah, our mission is really to be the national voice for these state agencies. And so every state has one. I live in Virginia Department of Health, across the river, Maryland Department of Environment. And so we kind of do three different things. We keep an eye on everything that's going on in DC and kind of curate the news and say, hey, this is what's important. You need to know about this. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that go on in DC that are interesting, but may not impact that agency directly. Then we also work with those agencies to collect data and information and feed it into EPA as they're developing the rules. And then even after the rules finalize, there's guidances and other things that they work on that I just got off a call on lead, sort of another big topic on implementation guidances for lead. And then the third thing that we do is broker information transfer between the states. So we had a states only webinar on Monday about nitrate. Nitrate's a big issue across the country, particularly in areas where there's heavy row crop agriculture. We had a discussion on PFAS, what we might consider saying or doing in regards to EPA's recent actions, considering that. So we really focus on that information transfer. We've started a lot of Teams channels so the states can talk to each other electronically. In the old days, it was always conference calls, or you'd post it on a forum. Now with some of the new tools, we're trying to broker the states asking each other for the questions, because they may ask a question and none of our people here are going to know it, but the guy in Indiana asks a question and the guy from Montana can answer it. And that is helpful for them to talk. We just serve as the broker on that information exchange.
That's
so those
interesting.
are really the three things: kind of information out, information in, and then information in between.
Well, that's interesting. That's a great way to collaborate amongst the agencies as those team channels. And yeah, technology is a good thing in that scenario, right?
Exactly. I mean, what we're doing here now, it's just a lot easier than what it was 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. 100% it is. Well, so the EPA last month came out with a position on the new proposed rule of the PFAS drinking water rule, which they want to pull back some of the MCLs for 4 of the main chemicals that they had previously listed that are currently in play, the shorter chain PFAS, and then they wanted to keep the 2 PFOS long chain chemicals in play at 4 parts per trillion. And then the main thing that seemed to be, besides the pulling back and wanting to reevaluate the 4 and maybe establishing an alternative number, I don't know, but I think that's what they're planning to do, but was to extend the time for compliance of drinking water for utilities to meet the upgrades that they need to achieve to meet these numbers. And I was curious, what's the ASDWA's position on how are they going to go around about supporting either one, the agencies that are if left with implementing a potential new rule like that, or even just dealing with the current one, right? And then how does that affect our public utilities and I guess affected community? So thoughts there, if you could share your ideas there, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the process of trying to develop a concrete position, but in general, the longer construction time frame, compliance time frame, in many cases is going to be a good thing because if you're a system that's just starting to figure out your PFAS problem, you've got to do the bench testing, pilot testing, figure out what technology you're going to use, do the plans and specs, get those reviewed and approved, get the money, and then build it. And, to be honest, in the normal 5-year timeline, that's pretty tight. So what would happen in the past is the system and the state would develop a compliance agreement saying, hey, you're making progress. Here are interim milestones you need to hit. And, if you're a few years late, you've met all these interim milestones. You can tell your customers you're making progress. It just takes time. And so, what it looks like this would allow essentially that to happen without these individual agreements. That being said, we've already heard discussions on both sides. They want to push as many people as possible to get it in as soon as possible for public health protection. So that's the dialogue that we're sort of currently working through now. There's also a question about the other 4 that are going through this reconsideration process, particularly GenX has some concern in that it's considered a replacement for the older PFAS, the 2 more common. And the concern is if you pull it back as more manufacturers and users switch off from PFOA and PFAS, we'll see more GenX out in the environment. Now, I'm not a health effects expert, Sean. I'm a civil engineer. And so I while having worked in the field for a while, and I can read health effects information, it's not my sweet spot. And so I'll read it. And so I can't, is GenX have less adverse health effects than PFOA, PFAS? That's my understanding, but how much? And if it becomes more widespread, how big of an issue it may or may not become, that's the kind of stuff that's just outside my expertise. So we're working through that debate. I mean, the press release that EPA came out with was a little thin on details, and that's all they're really going to have until they propose
the rule.
These changes, they hope by the end of the year.
So what role will the ASDWA play in providing feedback to EPA during the development of the proposed PFAS drinking water standards?
One thing we're trying to get a little better handle on is whether, if they maintain the 2 MCLs for PFOA and PFAS and don't move forward with the hazard index, how does that change the number of systems that have to put in treatment? Right now, we think it's a small percentage, but we'd like to get more granularity. So we're thinking we may survey the states and the information they have, and a lot of them have already done the math on, oh yeah, it'll be 3% or 8% less that would put in treatment. So it's not a big number. It'd be nice to have more granularity. And then if there's any more useful information that states have found out in the process of already working through, what was put in place last year, we'll pass that along to EPA to help them in the formulation of the proposal. So from our point of view, it's how do we call it implementable. How do we make the rule implementable? Easiest to implement, primarily for our state agencies, but typically that also means it's easier for the water systems to implement. Mm-hmm. So because you kind of have this triangle of EPA and the utilities and the states, what's good for the states is typically good for the water systems as far as making a rule implementable, understandable. People can figure out what's going on. It's helpful to have that. So,
hello, ET Nation. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying the interviews we bring you, consider supporting the program by visiting my website at SeanKGrady.com and buy me a cup of coffee. Proceeds will go towards helping me continue producing timely content and offset production costs. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize a few of our sponsors of the show who have been amazing partners and are ET Nation legends. If you're looking for a drilling and environmental contracting firm to help you delineate the extent of contamination at your site, then look no further than Cascade Environmental. Cascade has over 37 offices across the country and offers a huge range of environmental and geotechnical drilling, site characterization, and remediation services. With their huge fleet of equipment and nationwide coverage, Cascade is a great choice to support your environmental and infrastructure needs. To learn more, check out their website at cascade-env.com. That's cascade-env.com. Hey, are you looking for an equipment rental company to help you with your next wastewater remediation or waste management project? E-Tank is the only environmental equipment rental company in the industry that offers 100% guaranteed, certified clean temporary liquid storage tanks at no additional cost. This protocol gives peace of mind for the previous customer by limiting their downstream liability, as well as the future customer by preventing any cross-contamination for all of their rental tanks. E-Tank also runs a one-of-a-kind complete maintenance program for all rental items, including liquid-tight roll-off containers, fluid transfer pumps, and filtration items. The next time you are presented with an environmental challenge, call E-Tank to come up with the solution for your problem. I want to thank one of our sponsors, WasteLink. WasteLink is the all-in-one software platform transforming how environmental professionals manage waste, connecting generators, service providers, and disposal facilities in a way that is simple, connected, and transparent. Their platform helps streamline everything from waste profiling and routing to inventory management and billing, giving you the tools you need to operate more efficiently and reduce cost. Whether you're a generator looking for better options or a service provider seeking greater efficiency, WasteLink has you covered. If you're ready to take control of your waste management processes and optimize your business, visit wasteLink.com to schedule a demo today. So it's safe to say currently that the EPA hasn't consulted with ASDWA on their proposed rule approach to the new, repeal or pullback of some of this currently. They haven't really engaged you guys.
No, but we've had conversations and they're willing. We've kind of had this dialogue saying, hey, we're going to try and figure out some information and bring it in. And they say, okay, that's fine. They just haven't. If we had the dialogue, they're not exactly sure some of the details about what they're thinking about, and we're in the same boat. We're not exactly sure on the details. So it's one of those things where we don't want to have a conversation and appear clueless. So we're doing our homework to try and figure out, okay, we'd like to see this, we'd like to see that one, this one, not so much. And there may be some things where our folks are split. And so we do this sometimes. We say, hey, several states think this and other states think that, and present both sides and let them decide. That's kind of the role of the agency, is making some of those tough decisions.
So does the association do, I guess, a lot of data mining and data analytics on a lot of the, like the UCMR data that's coming through the various drinking water utilities across the country in each state, and assessing, where the impacts and are being identified, and maybe making recommendations or identifying like the severity of potential exposure of PFAS in the drinking water, operations or communities out there? I mean, what are you guys doing anything
Yeah,
in that space?
yeah, we're just starting to get into that. We hired a couple of young people last fall, September, and they're starting to figure out how to do that. What we're finding so far is that in general, you really have to work on what questions you want to ask. It's easy to like kind of get lost in the data. And so, what are you trying to assess? And this is one question I mentioned earlier, which is okay, if you just maintain those 2 MCLs at 4 parts per trillion and take away the others, how much of the pie are you taking away with the other four?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, it won't be more like scraping. We'll just ask them and they'll tell us what the numbers are and we'll compile them. That we're not really like a data analytics shop. We're better at asking the states for the information and compiling that, and then turning that into information. That's really more what we do. But you
At the
never
end,
know. Again, like you said, technology's changing. The tools are changing. We got these 2 young people that are not that are better at it than I am.
sure. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the proposed rule, um, having the two older long chain PFAS chemicals listed as the potential new targets. And again, everyone listening, keep in mind the current rule still is in place. It's not being, changed anytime soon yet. There's a whole process here. But if we just played out the scenario, so to speak, if they keep the two, long chain ones, and they maybe reduce or don't even have levels for the other four, I mean, I would be surprised if they didn't have levels, but you just say those, if they didn't, and they had utilities only testing for those two long ones, well, what about all the chemicals that could be missed or not being evaluated that do actually have health effects, right, in communities? And it would be interesting to know which communities have more of those shorter chain hits than, say, these two larger long chain ones, because that's got a different, impact to those
Yeah,
communities, and that. So
yeah. No,
I think
it's
the
not a
data,
simple question. Yeah,
right,
I agree
right.
with you. Yeah, particularly if you're in a community like in Cape Fear, North Carolina, where you're downstream of a Chemours facility, and they found some high levels of GenX. So
Mm-hmm.
they figured that out early on and have put in treatment. But you're right. The question is how many others are out there that
Right.
aren't as well known as Cape Fear.
Yeah, right. And it just seems like, a large data analytics type exercise of the agency's data that's coming through could really help disseminate or decipher what's really going on across the country, because I think that should play into, from the science side of things, where the big impact areas are
Yeah.
that we're
No, I agree
seeing.
with you. It's
Yeah.
again, it's something that we might do. Again, we just had our first conversation on Monday on kind of what do
Hmm.
we think about that, and we'll need more conversations by this technical group that'll feed into our board of directors for final positions. So
Sure.
it's going to take some time. I think we have some time,
Hmm.
um, but not a lot. EPA wants to propose by the end of the year. I'd like to get some input into the agency before that to help them formulate their thinking, what might be in the proposal.
So I noticed on the website that you guys also have an initiative to support maybe the laboratory capacity needed for treatment of PFAS, or for
Yeah,
testing of PFAS. And maybe you could speak a little bit about what you guys are thinking in that space of, is there enough testing capacity in the industry to support all this testing that needs to be done?
yeah, we're kind of focusing on the state labs, the ones that every state's required to have a lab.
Hmm.
How big the lab is and how much compliance sampling they do varies. across the state. There's only a few states that do all the compliance sampling. I think so far so good that the commercial labs have expanded their capacity for UCMR 5, and that will help. But UCMR 5 only hits systems above 10,000, and so there's still a large number that'll be below it. I think there'll be some supply chain issues when everyone has to do their initial monitoring initially, but I think you're also going to find a fair number of systems that aren't going to have it, and so there'll be some supply chains on that first go round, but then for ongoing compliance sampling it should be all right.
So in that process, Alan, from a state's perspective, and they have a state lab, I have an experience with Indiana, and they had a state lab, and I think that the technical equipment needed to actually achieve certain detections wasn't quite up to snuff compared to the industry type laboratories out there. And I think, why wouldn't the states just defer to the local industry labs instead of relying on their own labs? I think there's good argument that would be a better approach because they're already maintaining the these testing limits now.
Yeah, and it's I agree with you. I mean, I think some states will maintain to maintain primacy, they have to have some lab. But I actually just looked at the requirements. It doesn't say they have to do everything. They have to be able to do. They cannot do zero. They have to be able to do basics, and so most of them can do the easier pesticides and VOCs and
right.
So I think that will still count, and I just think just a few are probably going to go. I think they're going to let the commercial labs do the majority. There's so much, not only just the equipment, but it's also the clean sampling and analysis techniques. You've got to use special gloves. You can't wear sunscreen or there's all kinds of stuff, because the very low levels, you can have contamination pretty easy.
So
I think a lot of states would rather just not deal with it and let the commercial guys do it.
Well, I think that might be a smart way to do it. EPA keeps updating and providing new guidance on the test methods that are out there. So there was a while there that the test methods were not really formalized, and now they are. They're getting better and better. So that's good, and that's really good. So, what are some of the concerns you are hearing from state regulatory agencies regarding the feasibility and cost and timeline of implementing, like, even just the current PFAS rule?
Yeah, it really boils down to probably two big issues. One, we talked a little bit about that initial round of monitoring, making sure that these smaller systems that are using a commercial lab know how to contract with a commercial lab for this kind of analysis and can do the sampling, do the clean sampling techniques, So that's one issue. And then the bigger issue is for let's say just a few thousand, because we don't know exactly, that have to put in treatment, that long timeline for pilot test, bench testing, pilot testing, plans and specs, and getting the money and building it. And then longer term, probably the third piece is operation and maintenance. If you put in carbon, you're gonna have to change the carbon every, 9 to 18 months, depending on where you're at. And that, while you may be able to get SRF money or other financing for the capital, you should be paying for your operation and maintenance through rates. And so there's going to be a lot of the smaller systems that are going to see real rate challenges and affordability issues when you have to put in that treatment. Now, how that plays out in the next decade, you could have more, and I wouldn't necessarily call it consolidation, but more where larger entities, counties may run a water authority that has 20 systems, and have a base rate across the entire county. We have a county here in Virginia. It's like the fourth county out as the suburbs go out, and they have a county water and sewer authority, and they've got, I think, 22 PWSs, and they're scattered. They have one edge that's the suburban, the rest of it gets more rural, and they just scatter it. And because they have the economic development of that one side that's typical suburban, they've got trained operators. The stuff's all interconnected. The guys have iPads where they can. We went and saw one of their little microfiltration plants, and the guy had an iPad and was showing us what he could do on it. Really knew his stuff, and so you may see more of that consolidated system operation to be able to generate the revenues for the ongoing operation and maintenance. That's really the kicker, is how those costs can impact rates and create affordability issues.
Yeah, and what is the ASDWA's position on, I guess the fairness, so to speak, in implementing the rule for ratepayers and being a voice for the community, because they're the ones that didn't cause the problem. It's an industrial discharge or somewhere.
Yeah.
Where do you guys sit in that space? Because it feels like there needs to be an advocate in for the little guy, right? And they're not getting the support. It feels like that I guess they would expect or want to see from these agencies across the board. And I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are there, and how you guys are helping communities in that space.
Well, I'd say nationally we're playing the role of Switzerland and staying pretty neutral, but personally I understand that. Again, my previous employer at AWA, we ran into the affordability problem several years ago with arsenic, because arsenic doesn't impact as many systems, and it's naturally occurring, which actually makes it more challenging than PFAS, because they're man-made. Somebody else made them, but the treatment for it is expensive to put in, expensive to replace. Some of the same issues. So in the early 2000s, we were grappling with that. Right now, I'd say we're looking toward the utility associations, AWA and AMWA and others. AWA has litigation on the current PFAS rule, and a lot of it has to do with exactly this issue. The affordability. They had Black and Veatch do a national cost compliance study, looked at their assessment of the rates at different system sizes, and for a system of, and I may not have the numbers exactly right, 250 people, you're going to see water rate increases annually of $500 or $1,000 a year, and that can have a real impact in a real community. So we've kind of relied's not exactly the right word. We're keeping informed through what they're doing. That I still keep in contact with the folks in the DC office, and so we're kind of letting them be the point of the spear on it. We're sympathetic to these issues and understand the fairness, and the utilities are passive receivers. They didn't create it.
Right.
The wastewater guys upstream are just taking it.
Right.
Our guys downstream are just, that's the water they have to use. And so we're empathetic, but we're not really playing an active role in trying to solve the problem.
Well, let me ask you this question then, Alan. What about the association's position on requesting more funding from the EPA to support these, communities with funding? Like, I know that the Biden administration had, into the infrastructure bill, allocated a lot of money for each state to support the implementation of this rule. But when you looked at that cost breakdown, you're like, that's not even close to really being enough to help these communities do what they need to really do. No. It was just kind of like a goodwill gesture almost. It felt like, to be honest with you, because we're like, oh my gosh, the cost of some of this upgrades for like one plant might be the entire budget that was allocated for a state.
If you're a 1% state and you have one big city that gets hit, you're exactly right on your numbers.
Yeah. And so what do you do there? I mean, are you guys advocating for a much more appropriate funding mechanism to implement this type of rule? And what does that look like for you guys?
Well, we are advocating for more money, but I can honestly say it won't be enough either. So the way it works is that Congress has a two-step process. You authorize a certain amount for the SRF, and then you appropriate the money. And like you said, under Biden, the infrastructure law, they appropriated more money. And so we are in the process. We submit testimony every year to the Appropriations Committee, and we're advocating for funding the SRF at their full authorized level. And that's about $3 billion a year. And in the past, we've averaged about $1 billion, 900 million in that range. So it's an increase, but it's not spectacular. But it's about what was the increase in the 5 years of the infrastructure bill funding. So we're going to go from a drop in the bucket to 2 or 3 drops in the bucket.
Okay.
It's still
woefully underfunded.
Yeah, it's still woefully underfunded. Yeah.
And I'm curious to see, does the association, are you guys putting any more emphasis with the EPA on pursuing the polluters?
We are, but again, what I've seen, and this is really more my experience at Fairfax Water, unless you have this giant factory close by, it's usually a combination of small sources that cumulatively can bump you over the MCL. And if you have a decent sized watershed, you might have 100 of these, and trying to track them down and who's the
culprit,
the bigger contributors. You may have 100, you may have a dozen of your big contributors. Trying to figure out the right 12 out of the 100 is really complicated. That's what we're seeing at Fairfax Water and at Watershed, where they have some issues. So I think, again, it's one of those things. Yeah, we have said, we have used that term. Utilities are passive receivers, and we support efforts to hold the manufacturers and users accountable.
Right.
Beyond that, again, we're letting that's something that AMWA and AWA and WEF and NACWA, they're really strongly going after that, because they understand that. The problem is that, to be honest, Sean, now we're fighting against the big manufacturers and even folks like airports and firefighting academies that they've kind of been indirect problems too. They're buying what was okay to use at the time, and now they have this kind of the problem. And so how this will play out on the Hill and liability exemptions, sort of the long term, it's anybody's guess.
Wow.
And again, as we said at the start, I've been working inside the Beltway for 30 something years, and the things in Congress are at a state that I've never seen before. And so there's a focus now on the budget, trying to get the budget out. We've had the Israel-Iran curveball come up in the last couple of days, here in June. And there are plenty of other issues that are occupying these folks' thinking.
Right.
And so the success that those water and wastewater associations will have is totally to be determined. I'm not going to bet on it. I quit betting on things in Congress a few years ago. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because it's always a constant, cycle of change, right? And administrative directives and priorities. And so it definitely is changing constantly. And you're right. I got to imagine it's a challenge.
We're up on the Hill a lot. We're trying to make sure that, again, we've got a young guy that is, up on the Hill once or twice a week, trying to talk to make sure that folks know about the need, the need for the funding, even though it's a drop or two in the bucket, it still is better than nothing, which is what it could be. And in the current budget environment, we're trying to make sure we don't end up with a zero. And then it's not even for that funding, but there's also federal funding that pays for a portion of every state program, the Public Water Supply Supervision Grant. And the president's budget zeroed that out. So we're up there saying, hey, if we don't have that, our folks can't review the plans and specs for this treatment. They can't do the inspections that are needed as they're building it to make sure that the money it's being used wisely.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think a lot of people are kind of understanding the implications on that. If there's no money, then all these activities that the state agencies do are going to be drastically reduced.
Sure.
Because they get money from other sources, but in some cases, the federal money is the vast majority of their funding for their staff. And
right.
that disappears. That's a problem.
That's a good point, Alan. I mean, the states are always relying on EPA funding for management and implementation of all the programs, whether that's hazardous waste,
Exactly.
wastewater,
wastewater, air,
right,
all that
right,
stuff.
air. I mean, they
all
are
that
all getting,
stuff was proposed to be zeroed out, and so my compadres and the state environmental regulator associations, we're all up on the hill saying, hey, for the appropriators, because again, the president makes a budget request and the people on the Hill actually appropriate the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're starting to make some headway because there are people in those committees whose states have had PFAS problems or they have air pollution problems. And so you can say, hey, these programs are at risk, the public health is at risk. And I think we're starting to make some headway on that.
So, not a lot, but there are a handful of states that have gone on and created their own PFAS rules and limits that are at above and beyond what the proposed EPA ones are. What, if any, does the association do to, support those agencies? Is there talk internally amongst the various agencies about helping, maybe you guys helping them draft and come up with alternative approaches to PFAS? I mean, maybe shed some light in that space, because we're seeing a lot of movement in the industry where, you got Michigan, you got several other states that are doing similar like new rules that are, in this state, you have to comply with this rule. It doesn't care what EPA does. You're doing it by, so now they're taking the levels and the rules into their own hands.
Yeah.
Which is a different approach, right?
Yeah.
And I guess they have primacy to do that if they want to, right?
Yeah, states always can be stricter or move ahead of EPA, and that's what we found. And I call this in the pre-COVID era, 17, 18, and 19. There's some states that traditionally have done this a fair amount, not a fair amount, but California,
for sure,
New Jersey. Sometimes there are a few that they regulate more, they might regulate at a lower number. And so what we did in that pre-COVID time frame was put together a handbook that just for the states that are doing this for the first time, places like Vermont as an example, here's the things to consider. And it kind of parallels the EPA process. You got to look at health effects, you got to look at occurrence, you got to look at the cost of treatment, you got to look at the benefit cost analysis. It's kind of a chapter. It was kind of a framework for setting your own state level standards for those folks. And we hired a facilitator. We had a couple workshops for both states that had done it before, as well as ones that were working on it. And I think that handbook came out in 2019 and was met with pretty good success. Since then, the ones that were working on it have done it. There really hasn't been any new ones because they could see EPA was working on coming down with their standards. So there was that push early on because EPA's plans weren't really clear. People they were getting internal pressure. In some cases, their state legislature mandated they come up with a rule by a certain date. So they had to, based on a state law. So we provided this resource. It was well received, but it kind of served its purpose at the time, which is fine from my point of view.
That's got to be a big lift for an agency to go through that process because it's probably going to be a state funded type effort versus a federal funded effort. So the states have to have their own, budget and, revenue and resources to actually do the work to create this new rule. And obviously the end game is to want public health protection.
Right.
But more than likely, if it's the way I understand states, and since I used to be a former regulator, there's usually some financial hook into a a community or a ratepayer or, something where they're going to generate some revenue from the process so they can, fund their future work and oversight. So I got to imagine a lot of states are like, hey, let's wait for the EPA to come out and tell us, because we don't have the bandwidth or technical expertise to do it probably.
Yeah.
Right.
As well as there are some states that are precluded from doing that in their constitution or policy. It's not many. There's probably a dozen.
Yeah.
But there's enough that they just wait. They have to wait.
And they have to wait.
And they can't be any stricter, no stricter than the federal government. So it kind of varies. But again, most, for example, Virginia never set standards, but they did, and this happened in a lot of states. They got money to do sampling kind of ahead of UCMR 5.
Yeah.
So they kind of had an idea of, and in Virginia, for example, they did one round of the suspected sites. They got more money, and they went to kind of like the tier 2 sites, so they were able to get a kind of a statewide representation of how big the problem might be, which was helpful for them to understand, okay, what do we do when the feds come out? And so that was, again, not a rule, but let's figure out. And then the states also use some of the money for emerging contaminants. There was some funding, the BIL money had infrastructure, lead, and emerging contaminants. They used some of that money for testing too, because some systems weren't ready to build yet. So they said, if we can get ahead and get everyone to do it, then that's a jump on this. It'll help the systems a bit. They may know a couple of years in advance of when they'd have to do the required federal monitoring. And that gives them time to start the bench testing, pilot testing, finding a consultant, all that good stuff you have to do. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I know the association's focus is mostly around drinking water, but what is your thoughts on the EPA's position on, classifying PFAS as a hazardous constituent under CERCLA, and the implications of that with any of the, the communities that are affected? Does that play into a bit of your, purview as far as concern or management?
Yeah, we kept an eye on it. I mean, really what we've been promoting probably louder is, trying to get these compounds out of commerce, that really, if you can get them out of the source, but if not, doesn't even that way, then, maybe down the road, if there's problems where it gets to be a bit of a sticky wicket, you'd like to do that from the manufacturer perspective, so they know what they're doing and they have to report under the toxic release inventory, all that stuff. What you don't want to happen on the back end that we still have to sort out is what happens to the biosolids from the wastewater plant, and then what we call residuals in water treatment, because, coming off the said basins, that dirt is used as an agricultural amendment in a lot of places too. And there hasn't been as much sampling on that to know, okay, are you just transferring these compounds around from one media to the other? And so we haven't really taken, this is another one where we kind of see both sides of the problem. We're aware of it and we weigh in, but it's not been as much of a focus as trying to help our states and the systems comply with these MCLs that are out there.
When it comes to treatment technologies that, maybe the ASDWA would be kind of supportive of, right? Like here's a handful of technologies that we know are effective. We are really positive on this. Do you guys have position papers on that, or where you're communicating to utilities, this is what we support now at this point in this, I guess, the stage of technology that's out there? Because it seems like it's an ever evolving landscape of new products and services, solutions. But what's that look like for you guys?
Well, it's good that you asked that. We have our biggest concern, or one of our biggest concerns, was the workload on state agencies and evaluating treatment, be it evaluating these pilot testing. And then this is for more traditional advanced treatment, GAC, maybe some of the sorbent media, let alone some of the more innovative technologies. So we partnered with AWA, my former employer, and we just put together this handbook on PFAS treatment evaluation. So it's a process that talks about how the systems and the consultants work with the states to get a smooth process, how you optimize that process of evaluating the treatments. This was just released earlier in 25. There was a session on it at the AWA conference last week in Denver. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is to broaden that out a little bit for some of the more innovative technologies, destruction technologies, even looking at other technologies that might be for something like nitrate or arsenic, where we still have problems out there.
Right.
And people are coming up with new media, or, maybe there's a media that was out there and the guy went out of business. So now you're having to evaluate another one because you can't replace what you have. And so the engineers, the state agencies still have to do that. So we're this was a pretty successful project with AWA in getting that done. And so we're trying to do what we can to focus on that part of it. We don't really have the resources to evaluate, this destruction technology or that. We're trying to figure out a framework that can help everybody. And again, we have one of these Teams channels that focuses on this. It's seen a little more traffic these days.
Are you guys helping facilitate technology providers and getting their technology in front of these agencies, like in webinars or promotional type things where, obviously you're not promoting any individual company or whatever, but you're saying, hey, we want to put it on a webinar. This is a technology you guys could consider. And here's, we're going to do something to educate you guys more about it. You can follow up with these guys later, but obviously this is something that might look promising. Are you doing anything like that where you're helping?
It's a good idea. I like it, Sean. I mean, I haven't, because again, we did that a little bit with lead service line inventories, the initial inventories. Mm-hmm. We did a series. This is early on, 3 years ago. Did a series of free webinars. One we had just kind of all the big engineering consultants talk about what they're doing and what they were finding. We had another one where there were more software providers, mm-hmm. Esri and their ArcGIS module, 120 Water and others on their offerings. That's not really our sweet spot, but I think it's helpful. We can play that role and do it in a way where, it's kind of like open season. Anyone's offered, anyone's able to participate, but that may be an effort that we'll take on later this year. I like the idea. We just haven't done it.
Yeah, there are a lot of software providers that are doing a lot of the, what do they call it? The AML, technology tracking, real-time water usage, really helping control the treatment and delivery process and rates, they got to collect the rates for the usage of water and those types of software really help. But then, we haven't really touched on it, but I'll bring it up. The lead contamination, there was a big push with the EPA to have all the utilities go out and identify the lead pipes in their networks throughout their, throughout the country, really. And I think that's still in progress, really. I don't know that that's complete yet. And there seems to be a lot of work.
Well, almost everybody submitted some. I mean, literally most states have a handful. They could have 40 if it's a big state, mm-hmm. but they've all had some who just haven't submitted anything, and there's enforcement going on. But most did something. The issue is reducing the unknowns,
right?
And so
the cost to go figure that out,
exactly. And even if you don't, you're not going to have to dig up everything, but at a minimum, you're going to have to dig up some so you have a data set and then some kind of model statistics to figure out. If you don't, and that takes time and money, as you say,
Yeah.
And so people, and it kind of varies how the systems are doing it. Some, they want to reduce all the unknowns, because if there's an unknown, you have to send an annual letter to those residences where you have an unknown saying, hey, it's unknown. We're working to figure it out. It might be lead, mm-hmm. And then the utility gets a lot of phone calls for getting a lead test of their water. So they like to reduce the number of letters they send out. And then you have some that just say, I'm just going to send out the letters and wait. And kind of wait it out and see what EPA does. So it ranges, but in general, most of the systems did an inventory, and we found that, most are at least reasonable. They passed the laugh test. We did sponsor a couple of, the deadline was October 16th of last year of 24. We sponsored some states only discussions in November, December, so they could talk amongst each other. And it was, generally pretty positive. So we thought that was a good thing that they didn't come to us and say, oh, these all stink and the systems are being lazy. I think most systems took it pretty seriously. There were a lot of programs through rural water and other technical assistance providers to do it for the very small systems. And so with that, you probably got a higher caliber of submissions than if they hadn't offered that service.
I got to imagine a lot of these. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We're having it here. We're just not getting we're getting rain. They haven't gotten the thunder yet. Yeah. So
we got the thunder
it's that time of the year.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm sure a lot of the utilities don't want to be a Flint, Michigan, right? And they don't want to have that, exposure. And so, they want their community to be safe, and they need to do it. I think it goes back again to a lot of funding challenges for these utilities to pay for the work that needs to be done. And then once the assessment's done, there's still a lot of work to be done on replacing and the pipes. And, that's another difficult, I guess, pill to swallow from a consumer too, because sometimes these rules are written like, well, the pipe goes to your house, you have to pay for that. Like,
that's right. From the right of way to the building wall, what's on private property, you have to pay for. Now, a very small number of utilities will set up like a separate foundation, and they'll get philanthropists to contribute to fund some of those. But those are needs based. It makes sense that if you live in a $2 million house,
you could probably afford to do that.
Probably afford the plumber to do that.
Right.
But there are plenty of people who can't. That they're scraping to get by and pay the normal bills every month. And so
100%.
I'm supportive of these programs. I mean, it ties back into some of the affordability discussion we had on PFAS treatment.
Sure.
That all of a sudden, if you're scraping by and they say, hey, we need $4,000 for your side of the line, you're going to go, I don't have $4,000. I don't have $400. Right.
Meanwhile, I'm exposed to lead pipe,
exactly,
my water, and
exactly.
that's not good too. And then of course those guys aren't the ones who put those pipes there, and they
so that was some plumber builder back in the day, and so these so I think that's just a longer term problem you have to chip away at. I think that that over time the lead service lines will come out, but it may take more time than what EPA requires, and that may be something that the new administration may take a look at, is be a little more flexible on the end game and having some way to certify that you have a reasonable effort to get the lines out of the ground, the lead lines.
So besides lead and PFAS, what are the big issues of the day for ASDWA?
I'd say the last one there's two. I'd say workforce and resilience. So we're seeing a real workforce challenge across the sector. And for a long time, Sean, it was always about the water operators, the operator in a little town, he's been there forever. But what I'm seeing is it cuts across anyone that works in water. So it's at EPA, it's at our agencies, it's at the consultants. They tell me they can't find people with like 12 years experience, 15, those are hard to come by. People in my tribe, we're all retiring. The boomers are coming out. And so there's a real workforce issue across the board. And again, with this budget crunch at EPA and the state agencies, they're struggling to replace those people. And so there have been some strategies. Again, we do a lot of state to state information transfer. How do you find good workers? How do you recruit and retain? If you hire someone and they work 3 or 4 years and they go to work somewhere else, you're starting over. So a lot of work on that. The other one is resilience. And, a lot of systems are quite old, and even a bigger system, they may not have maintained it properly. And they can, whenever you have a system failure, usually it's a confluence of multiple factors. It's not one thing. And so you always think about that and the challenges of a small system, but there are major metropolitan areas
Same problem.
that are on shaky ground.
Same problem. Yeah, they haven't reinvested or upgraded their infrastructure over time. They haven't allocated budget for constant improvements. I mean, that's a big problem.
The one thing that I see that relates to that, I think a big difference is whether the utility is in a city government or a separate authority or utility district. So Fairfax Water is a separate authority for the county. The board is appointed by the county supervisors. There's real separation between the board of directors and the elected officials. So Fairfax Water has been raising their rates 5% a year the entire time I've been on the board, and even before I started. So 20 years of 5% a year, and they've doubled the amount of infrastructure they're replacing, and they're trying to double that again to level off so that they're now replacing their pipes at an adequate amount. And we're taking a harder look at backup power. So there's a lot of issues, and the one that happened here was the city of Richmond. Their treatment plant went down and they were out of water on the day the legislature was coming back into town to start their session in January. So that gets everybody's attention when the legislature kind of gets called to order and immediately adjourns,
Hey, you have to boil your water. It's not safe.
They were out for a while, and then you got to boil the water for 3 or 4 days. So that got everyone's attention. And in the after action report, you can see that they weren't keeping up with the infrastructure. The workforce wasn't properly trained. A lot of the issues that I talked about. And so I think that's an issue that everyone has to think about a little differently is how do you be better prepared? Because water is 24/7, 365. You don't notice it till you don't have it.
We all need it.
We all need it
to live.
If you think about every time you touch water during the day, starting from when you get up in the morning, everyone in the morning, they go to the bathroom, they have coffee or tea, or just drink a glass of water. Nobody gets through. I shouldn't say that, but I don't know anybody who doesn't get through their first 2 hours and get touched by water a couple times. And so you expect it until you don't have it. And you've lived just 24 hours. And that's happened a couple times in my life through primarily power outages. But you adapt and adjust. But if those 24 hours turn into a week, it changes things really quick.
Yeah. So backup power is important. Absolutely.
Backup power is important. Thinking about infrastructure, single points of failure, all that kind of stuff.
So what are you got the rest of this year, you got 6 months now looking forward to the end of this year. What's your top priorities for the remaining part of this year?
I think it's really, it's trying to get advocating for this funding on the Hill. There's two. I think that's the big one. How do we make sure they understand the need for they're called categorical grants for all the environmental regulators. We go up there, we talk about for our members, but we say, hey, by the way, that's 1 of 9 for the environment. That's all about protecting public health and the environment.
Right.
So I think that's a big message. And I think it's also working with EPA on what they might do on PFAS and or lead to make sure the changes that get proposed are better if that's the way they decide to go. So continuing the dialogue with EPA is what we're looking at doing.
Right. Yeah, that would be good. Well, hey, Alan, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking some time to kind of give our listeners a little bit more insights on the Association of Safe Drinking Water, water administrators, and what you guys are doing to support the agencies across the country and the big tasks they have at hand, and how you're aggregating and brokering and being that go-between between the Hill and the EPA and the agency. So I really appreciate you explaining that for our listeners. Appreciate the work you're doing, and keep up the great work, and let us know. Maybe we can revisit maybe in a couple of months or so, or 6 months down the road, see if there's any positive impacts or, outcomes that you've been able to achieve. And we just keep in touch. So
that'd
really
be great.
Your time.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity today, Sean.
Thanks for listening and watching the show. If you enjoyed the show, then please share it with your friends and coworkers on social media, and tell somebody in person. Thanks for being with us, ET Nation.